All right, let's jump right into this explainer and systematically unpack the whole concept of workaholism, specifically the hidden costs and the diminishing returns that come with it. We live in a world that absolutely treats constant busyness like some sort of badge of honor, doesn't it? But as we dig through the source material today, we are going to look way past the hype. We're going to look closely at the math, the actual biology, and the hidden costs of compulsive overwork. So here's a pretty provocative question to start us off. I really want you to think about this. What is literally the only addiction out there that society actively praises? Most compulsive, self-destructive behaviors get interventions. People recognize them as tragic. But this specific behavior, working yourself to the bone at the expense of everything else, you actually collect admiration, promotions, and prestige along the way. Moving right into Section 1, the applauded addiction, or, as it's perfectly subtitled here, socially sanctioned destruction. Now, this is where it gets incredibly tricky. The social reinforcement makes this condition nearly impossible to diagnose from the inside. Think about it. Alcoholism destroys relationships and careers, and society steps in to say, hey, this is a serious problem. Workaholism destroys those exact same personal relationships, but what happens? The victim is handed a massive award and a year-end bonus. Because the world actively rewards this dedication, the damage remains completely invisible to the person suffering, right up until it's catastrophic. Okay, Section 2, the productivity paradox. We are going to debunk the total myth of hours versus actual output. Let's anchor the data right here at 50 hours. The research across our sources consistently points to the law of diminishing returns. Productivity, as it turns out, is not a straight line that just goes up forever. In almost any cognitive or creative role, your total productivity basically drops off a cliff right around 50 to 55 hours a week. Meaning someone grinding out 70 hours is very often producing the exact same amount, or honestly even less, than someone who clocked out at 55. And actually, let's break that down even further to your daily limit, 6 hours. Contrast that huge weekly total with your actual daily cognitive capacity. Genuinely focused, deep work begins to rapidly degrade after just 6 hours. Why? Well, because the human brain is an incredibly energy-intensive organ. It's biological tissue, guys, not a machine you can just plug into a wall socket. It absolutely requires recovery to function. Which brings us to a really fascinating concept, the fatigue tax. By the time you push into hour 70 or 80 of your work week, you are paying this tax, and you're paying it heavily. Your willpower battery is totally drained, you're making terrible strategic choices. Basically, you are spending your Tuesday morning fixing the low-quality, error-filled mistakes you made at midnight on Monday. Crazy, right? And that leads us straight into what's called the shallow work trap. Workaholics frequently mistake motion for progress. Motion feels like momentum, right? It's that performative busyness, constantly refreshing your inbox, jumping into endless meetings. But progress? Progress is genuine strategic thinking. By working 12-hour days, you're essentially trading a bicycle for the mind for a treadmill for the ego. You are running incredibly fast, you're exhausted, you're sweating, but you are staying in the exact same place. That brings us to Section 3, the virtue costume, work as emotional avoidance. So, according to the sources, workaholism very often masks what we just do not want to deal with. It acts as a brilliant, custom-made virtue costume. It is the single most socially acceptable place to hide from, say, an uncomfortable marriage, or the pure existential anxiety of unstructured time, or just the quiet terror of being totally alone with your own thoughts. Let's be real, it is often so much easier to manage a spreadsheet crisis than to confront who we actually are when the laptop is finally closed. And the real danger of that hiding spot is what our sources call identity collapse. If you construct your entire identity around being the hardest worker in the room, you are building your sense of self on a terrifyingly fragile foundation. Because think about it. What happens when there's an interruption? What happens if you get sick or there's a layoff or you eventually retire? It doesn't just change your daily schedule, it absolutely shatters your identity. All right, Section 4, the body keeps score, biological insolvency. Because here is the cold, hard truth. Your biology absolutely does not care about your quarterly targets. The clinical toll here is systemic. We're talking elevated risk of cardiovascular disease, severe anxiety, a totally compromised immune system. The body views sustained overload not as ambition, but as a literal biological threat to its survival, and it responds accordingly, compounding this damage over decades. You might crush it at the office for a year, but trust me, your body is keeping a very precise ledger. Which leaves us with this pretty sobering reality.
Burnout isn't just a risk you can manage. It's a mathematical certainty. Success bought with your health is biological insolvency. It's basically a massive loan taken out against your physical form, and it is going to be repaid with heavy, heavy interest. A physical collapse is absolutely predictable if the overload doesn't stop.
Moving on to Section 5, the later fallacy, the poverty of rest and collateral damage. Our sources talk about the cultural transmission of these destructive habits, and honestly, it's a tragic ripple effect. Kids of workaholics learn that love is demonstrated through absence. Partners learn they play permanent second fiddle to the job. Entire organizations get poisoned by this performative exhaustion because colleagues learn that setting a healthy boundary is viewed as a sign of weakness. And even your time off, it gets ruined. It's stripped of all its intrinsic joy and just converted into recovery time so you can survive going back to work. This all culminates in what we call the later fallacy. It's this persistent, incredibly powerful illusion that you will attend to your health, your family, and your friendships later, when things finally slow down. But the real heartbreak here, discovering that later is the exact moment you find out those friendships have quietly faded away, the unrepeatable windows of your kids growing up have closed forever, and your body has already made its own decisions about your health.
Let's look at a better way in Section 6, toward a rhythmic life. Sprints versus chronic overwork.
So we have to recognize that there is a categorical difference between purposeful intensity and compulsive overwork. True mastery, producing genuinely amazing work, isn't built on running endless marathons. It's built on bounded sprints toward really meaningful goals, followed immediately by high-quality, zero-guilt rest. Compulsive overwork, on the other hand, that's just a lifestyle sustained by the total terror of stopping. A truly productive life requires rhythm, not a marathon.
And it really all boils down to this ultimate existential reality check found across our sources. Almost no one on their deathbed wishes they had spent more time at the office. It's a cliche for a reason. The regret runs almost entirely in the opposite direction. We are out here trading the finite, irreplaceable currency of our health, our time, and human relationships for a total illusion of dedication.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. It's not a question of how much you can work. The real questions you have to ask yourself are, what are you actually working for? And is the price you are paying today actually worth the prize you hope to find, especially when there might be no time left to enjoy it? Take a really hard look at your own rhythms and just make sure you aren't sacrificing the life you're trying to build for the illusion of the grind.